People who cater to the super rich, what things have you seen? My dad works in shipping and has a lot of friends who have worked on super yachts. In the 90s, one of his mates got a call up to bring the yacht of a particular Australian media tycoon billionaire, not that one, from Sydney to New York, with instructions to be anchored in a particular bay at an exact time with a lunch spread for 50 people ready. So they got there and set up the food. The guy never showed up. Turns out he was having a rich dude party in a building overlooking the harbor and wanted to be able to point down and say, "That's my boat." He wanted the lunch just in case he decided to take his rich friends down to his yacht, but he didn't feel like it that day, so all the food got wasted and they sailed back to AUS without seeing him. I heard an interview on the radio from a guy who was from my hometown in the UK who was Stallone's personal chef in the 90s. He said Stallone was a nice guy. He had something in his house where he could watch the amount of tickets his films was selling in live time, so knew almost immediately whether it was a flop or not. He was married to Bridget Nielsen at the time, and this chef said she was walking about topless or naked all the time, which he thought was strange until she walked up to him one time when Stallone was out and offered it to him on a plate. He politely declined because he liked Stallone and they were divorced a few years later, so there may have been other things going on. I used to work for a company that modified aircraft for really rich people. I'm talking 747s, not Gulfstreams. This company had made several aircraft for this one customer, who I was told had purchased a new one solely because his spiritual advisor had told him that one of his current planes was bad luck. He still let his wife use it for her personal travel. To me, one of the most exquisite features of these planes wasn't the gold-plated everything, or rare wood veneers, it was the silk carpet. That stuff cost over $1,000 per square foot and feels like walking on a bed of angel feathers harvested in the most inhumane way possible. Granted, these guys don't deck out the whole plane, just their personal areas. The aft third is usually reserved for staff and such and is more like a fancy economy class, but yeah, silk carpet. I tutored a wealthy 5-year-old. I got paid good money to spend an hour drawing and coloring and playing with this kindergartner, but all in French. He had been to more places in the world by 5 than I'll ever go to in my whole lifetime probably. The best part of the job were the perks, though. They would take me and my so out to dinner at fancy restaurants and pay the bill no matter what it was. They would invite us over to eat some delicacy they prepared. Wife was Chinese/Vietnamese, husband was Indian, and they'd always have some house guests staying with some crazy resume. For example, one time they had a diplomat for the Netherlands there to do business. They had houses in my city and in San Francisco and would fly there all the time. They invited me on several occasions, but I never had time to go. I also befriended and stayed with the daughter of Russian oligarchs who lived in Paris. The mom was a famous writer and the dad did something in business. Their grandfather was a famous Soviet writer, and so in general they lived a very cultured life. They lived in the richest part of Paris called Neuilly-sur-Seine and had houses in the Alps, Crimea, and Moscow. The crazy part, or rather sad part, was that she only had a few options for a career. She could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a businesswoman. Their son was lucky enough to study at the Geneva Conservatory, but that was only because he was really talented. In this family, if you didn't have a natural artistic talent, you only had those 3 career prospects to choose from. I had the impression that she was rather depressed about how limited her options were and how much pressure was put on her to succeed. I used to do pool and spa maintenance in my 20s. I worked on one property with a mountainside, 10-bedroom/14 bath mansion, with a saltwater pool, tennis courts, guest mansion, and a servant's house that was 4-bedroom 5-bath. The property had so much more stuff, but that isn't the crazy thing. I worked on this property for 2 years, year-round, 5 days a week, and not a single person was ever there. The middle-aged, single woman that owned it lived in a city about 4 hours away and just didn't come to the property, because she was so busy with work. A multi-million dollar compound, just empty. All the time. Finally, after 2 years, I got a call from my boss on my day off. He asked if I could go to the house to put some pool floats away. He apologized, because it was my day off, but said the owner would pay me $500 to go put them away. I was confused as to why there were even pool floats out anyway, because nobody was ever there, but I figured fuck it, $500 for 10 minutes. I show up to the house and the woman's adult children were staying at the house with about 10 plus kids between them all, and they were having a massive pool party / cookout. I awkwardly walked up and said to one of the parents, "Sorry, it must have been a mistake, but I was told to come put pool floats away, but you're obviously here so I'll leave." Presumably the woman's adult son said, "Oh, no, we're getting ready to leave. You can take them." Then he instructed the kids to push them towards me. I literally grabbed one inner tube float and 4 pool noodles, brought them 10 feet into the pool house, and put them away. I, confusedly, said they were all set and went to leave. The son thanked me and handed me a folded mass of $20 bills. It was $400. I was expecting $500 from my boss for payment, but I figured $400 cash was still overpayment, so I didn't mention it. The next day at work, my boss gave me $1,000. I told him the son had already paid me $400, which was fine. He said the son told the woman how great a job I did, so she wanted to pay me $1,000 instead of $500 and the $400 was a tip from her son. For 10 minutes of work. She actually called my boss the next day to ask if she should reimburse me for gas, since it was 15 minutes from my house. I told him that I was all set. I did IT work for a tiny little private company like the owner, his brother, and me. Guy called because his new PC wouldn't turn on and it's like 3 p.m. He was 100% willing to pay for me to drive 5 hours one way to get it working today because he wanted to play games today. Okay, so 5-hour road trip one way and the address is this huge fucking mansion. 100% thought I was in the wrong place. Use the intercom at the gate and nope, this is the place. Guy and his wife are really cool and the dude had built his own gaming rig. It was absolutely over the top. I had never even laid eyes on hardware that expensive before. He never turned the power switch on his PSU on. He paid the base rate of $1,400 for me to come out there to flip a switch. I also installed his graphic drivers, but that was technically free, and then gave me $5,000 cash as a tip, all because he was excited to play League of Legends on his new PC. Edit, thank you all for the awards. Maybe he grew up dirt poor. Had to sleep in the loft above the barn because there was no more space in the house, which was basically a shack, after his baby sister was born. He worked hard, got smart, and moved out to make his fortune when other kids were still deciding what they wanted to be. He never slept well in the huge, sterile houses that followed. He would crack a window, put on nature sounds on surround going to sleep. One day, when he realized he had enough money to never worry again, he thought about what was important to him. By now his family was all gone, the farm had been long sold and he didn't have any ties to the old land. But damn if he couldn't have the childhood peace of going to sleep listening to those gentle beasts laze about in the hay below. He didn't even care what the contractors would think. Even when he had to explain for a third time, "Yes, I said a retractable floor section so I can hear and see them." That first night he remembered what it was to sleep like a baby. Worked graveyards as a valet at an ultra-luxury boutique hotel. It's quite shocking how some of these people live and you'd never have a clue by just looking at them on the street. One weekday night I was asked at 2 a.m. by a guest to bring around his Bentley. Regular looking dude came out with a backpack, got in and left. Not 30 minutes later the same dude pulls up in a Ferrari and now has a briefcase instead of backpack. Skip ahead an hour and the same guy orders 5 shot glasses to his room. I go up and it's two guys in robes and two naked ladies on the couch. They have lines of coke and booze on the coffee table. They tip me 50 for the shot glasses and I leave. 2 hours later, just as the sun was rising, the two guys come out together in suits looking like they were heading to the office. The ladies left shortly after. Obviously drugs and escorts were nothing new, but the car swap middle of the night was a bit strange. When rich people want to buy a Jaguar in the UK, they get assigned a special salesperson who is incredibly knowledgeable. They meet in a special fancy office, and special arrangements can be made. This was my friend Chris' job. He had access to things that a normal Jaguar salesperson wouldn't have. Like he could ring up the manager of the factory for special requests level of access. Well, a Saudi prince wanted to buy this new Jaguar that had been released, so they met up and spent a full day speccing the Jaguar out. I believe the final price was something like 125k for the vehicle. Then came the decision for color. At the time the factory had 16 different color choices for this model. The prince asked if he could sleep on it as it was getting late and almost time for dinner/prayer. My friend Chris says of course, and they set a time to meet the new morning. The next morning the Saudi price is like, I figured out an acceptable solution to my color dilemma, to which Chris goes, and what would that be? The Saudi prince goes, I'll order one of each color. And my friend Chris is like, oh well, of course. They quote delivery time. Saudi prince was fine and asked for his options and was presented with ocean travel options, to which the prince said, what about air cargo? Chris, thinking maybe they'd do 1 or 2 by air cargo and the rest by boat, the prince was like, no, I want all 16 vehicles loaded on a plane, and flown to Saudi Arabia. So that's the story on how 16 of the same Jaguar with different colors ended up being flown to Saudi Arabia. All in, the total cost was around 2.5 million. Please note the prices should be pound, not dollar. Nothing too fancy, but I used to help build multimillion-dollar homes about a decade ago. One couple, neurosurgeon and dentist, had an office with one of those bookcase doors leading under the stairs. They stored their surround sound equipment and a safe in there. Another house had a very micromanager-esque woman as the owner along with her husband. She would regularly come to the site and order the workers around while the foreman sighed and rolled his eyes at her. At one point he had to order her off the site because she was being a safety hazard to his workers. I remember this couple also has a creepy setup for their kids, 2 bunk beds on either side of a wall for the kids, and both rooms led to a bathroom facing the road with a big bay window right next to the tub. So essentially, any person driving or walking past, or any neighbor could just look over and see these kids taking a bath. I've worked with some fairly wealthy people in the developing world. More or less new money, people who have been successful with some business venture or other. Overall, they're a bit out of touch with the realities of the world. I used to think that they were a bit naive too, because I saw a lot of other people taking advantage of them/outright robbing them. Over time, I realized while that's not untrue, it's more complicated. They did fail to notice a lot of uncollegiate activity on the part of the people they hired, but not all of it. What they did notice, they wrote off as the cost of finding people they could trust with projects that were actually important to them, and work with for years. So yeah, you could overbill them for a few $1,000 once or twice, but if you worked hard and produced results instead, you could bootstrap your whole business to the next level with just them as a client. Eventually, I realized they valued trust a lot more than they valued money. They made their money with fairly long-term, high-risk, high-reward ventures running in parallel, e.g. research. So it all makes a little more sense now. I know plenty of rich useless people too, but not very well. A lot of wealth is simply inherited in Asia. Cash flow is a really difficult thing here. Some people think they're important because they're born rich and act like fools. They do some pretty wild stuff, but I don't stick around to hear about it. I had a classmate whose father or mother was filthy rich from family money, can't remember. But they and he were amazing people. In uni, this girl in class who was really nice but also came from a poor family dropped her mabook. She worked 60 hours a week for 3 months in the summer. He just came up, gave her his mabook, and said he would just get a new one after school and his parents wouldn't care. Pure generosity. There was no TikTok movie or karma whoring going on. He was a stellar dude, spending his parents' money but only on stuff for other people and in a nice helpful way. He also gave all the guys in class a suit for graduation. Lots of the people were talking about renting one and stuff, and he told everybody he knew a place to rent real nice suits. We all went there and we all rented a suit for €100 or so, everything included, and when you went to return it we found out they were all paid for by this dude. He was like, renting a suit is stupid, but buying a suit is expensive. Now you got best of both worlds. Last thing I heard, he bought like 10 PS5 from scalpers and sold them for retail to kids in the neighborhood. Fuck, I should have stayed friends with him. Some kids have whole plans and strategies they practice to prevent being kidnapped or harmed by crazy stalkers. One kid I worked with was the kid of a big Hollywood player. And people would stalk the kid in an attempt to get to the parent. So this nutjob wielding a screenplay broke in and cornered the kid. Here I am thinking I am going to have to throw myself physically between them, but the kid dove into a nearby dog kennel and locked themselves in. He couldn't get out, but the nutjob couldn't get in either. So the nutjob just threw the screenplay at him into the kennel. Meanwhile, I had called the cops. I was so impressed by the kid's quick thinking and asked how he got the idea. But he said that he always keeps an eye out for a way to escape. And when he sees someone he doesn't know approach, he gets ready to run. I felt awful that this kid had to live like that. If I hadn't seen it happen myself, I would have thought it was just paranoia. I worked for UPS for a hot minute as a driver helper and got to see some interesting things. The one driver had the rich of the rich route, the mansions worth tens of millions around the Ann Arbor, MI area. The Ford mansion, Lloyd Carr, the one recent guy for Michigan football that I'm forgetting that also worked for Little Caesars. Edit, the name I was forgetting was Dave Brandon. Anyway, I got to see Dave Brandon's mansion. It was gated, deep in the woods, and absolutely huge. The driver, a 33-year UPS veteran, told me these guys with these huge mansions like this, they don't live there by themselves. Sometimes don't live there at all. They move their entire extended families in there. Parents, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. And they all live off the rich guy's dime, ordering whatever they want whenever they feel like it. I think we delivered 30 or 40 packages there that one day. Second story from the same day and with the same driver, we delivered to a smaller, but still huge, house with an extremely long and wooded driveway. The driver was cursing about how much he hated these people because they always parked this huge ass boat in the only possible turnaround point in the driveway. So he goes in backwards and floors it. Maybe 40 miles per hour backwards, about 250 yards of bends, straights, and he drove it absolutely perfectly, never driving off or missing the driveway. We get to the house and he needed a signature. He handed me the package and said he'll get the signature and just hand them the package and we'll go. Well, we get to the door, and this maybe late 40s or early 50s man, kind of a Rick Moranis / George Costanza type of build. Short, extremely thick glasses, balding, but very skinny build. He's standing in the front door with a lab-looking dog on a leash. The driver says, "Good evening, we just need a signature and we'll be on our way." I used to install DirecTV in wealthy areas of an East Coast city in the US. While I try to give customers options on where I install the satellite dish, I have to get a good line of sight for it to work properly, so sometimes the location options were limited. One rich lady's house, gorgeous house right on the beach, I only found 2 good spots for the dish. It could either be on a pole in the middle of her backyard, or on the corner of the roof. She definitely did not want it in the middle of her yard. Only problem was that she had a metal roof and we use specific mounting hardware for that. We happened to be backordered on that hardware for a few weeks out. When I informed her of this, she got visibly upset that she'd have to wait that long to get her cable up and going. I apologized many times and told her she'd need to reschedule a few weeks later and I leave. 3 days later I'm looking over my work orders for the day and I notice her name and address. I'm like, wow, I bet she thinks she's getting a different installer who she can try to convince to give her a different answer. I was wrong. I pull up to the house, brand new shingle roof. I did the install on the roof. As a chauffeur and ski companion for a mega rich guy's daughter, he sent me out to buy her a birthday present for when she turned 17, I think it was. This was way back in the 70s, so I got her a new BMW 2002, and told the dealer to charge it to the guy. Which was cool, and later the dealer offered me an absolute deal on a trade-in that was the usual cream puff only driven to church on Sundays. $500 for a really good late model used car, but an American car they never dealt in. Much later on, 30 years later, I was working with an architect building a home for another mega rich guy and the library was to be paneled in knotty pine. Guy's wife arrived when it was almost completely trimmed out and says, "Too many knots." So we ripped out the whole interior and the guy, who owned several sawmills, sent back to the mill to ship another truckload so we could select the boards under the wife's direction. And same wife, same building, could not figure out how to turn the car around in the triple-wide driveway, so he had a turntable installed in the garage so all she had to do was miss the edges of the door on the way in or out. A cousin works at, let's just say, a higher-end, worldwide known hotel chain, and he works at one in a large US city. Couple years back, a random guy came up to him and asked him for a dinner suggestion and says price isn't a concern. My cousin keeps up with what's trendy in the city, knows some owners and such, and gave the guy a suggestion. Next day the guy asked for him by name, gave him $100 and said dinner was amazing, now where should we eat tonight? Another suggestion and the next day, another $100. Only this time, his manager saw this goes down and then a few minutes later, do you know who that is? Nope. I won't say the name, but let's just say old money and probably in the hundreds of millions net worth. Cool story, huh? Well, a couple months later my cousin went to work one day and was told this person would be calling at 6 p.m, and only wanted to speak to my cousin. The conversation was short, basically a "we're in town next month for 4 nights, book the 6 of us for wonderful dinners, we trust your opinion." He was given an email for basically their family assistant, and to let that person know the plans. The family arrived, said hi to him as they checked in, and said they were looking forward to their dinners, and 4 days later upon checking out handed him $1,000 for his wonderful local knowledge. Or something like that.